You want to talk about the topic of world models and model-based reinforcement learning is like I think like a lot of deep learning people became introduced to this with Mu Zero, like the successor of AlphaGo, AlphaZero, Mu Zero, where there was this tree search and reinforcement learning seems to be booming again now as people are thinking about agents and their function calling loop is taking actions when they make tool calls that sort of takes them to the next state. And so I don't know if too many people who are building like enterprise knowledge agents are thinking about world models in the sense that like we're going to plan like what the results of sending this request to my Notion database and then moving this ticket in Jira. Like I don't know if the enterprise knowledge agents, if that's the consumer of this world models, model based reinforcement learning, but I definitely see there's like a lot of interest in this topic broadly. And I think what it connects with what we're saying is when you have a world model, you're trying to predict what next states your actions are going to take you to so that you can like plan like 10 steps ahead before you take that next immediate action. And then there's some uncertainty, I imagine, in that tree of predicting the next states from the actions. And I think that's maybe where these things connect.
Yes, and the thing is, I mean that going back to, the original kind of like, AlphaGo, AlphaZero sorts of architectures, right? Which are trying to combine that traditional sort of symbolic AI approach to, search through a space of, possible states to pick an action to go in that, in the most productive direction. That applies to reasoning as well as, moving around in a room kind of a thing. Uh, it's I've always struggled to kind of wrap my head around the full range of ways in which reinforcement learning is being applied in this kind of recent work, uh, and what that says about how we are, interacting with these systems moving forward. In some sense, you can think of reinforcement learning as a conversation, right? It's a dialogue between the system, which is making choices, and then some oracle, which is basically saying, okay, well, that was good or that was bad, and allowing it to kind of come up with some internal way of talking about the state of the world and the potential for success in performing certain actions to get to certain kinds of goals. And it's that mixing of the sort of good old fashioned AI, goal directed, reasoning and action happening with this neural substrate, which is again exploiting not only language but other kind of modalities to be able to grapple with the world, not just from a language point of view, but from a perception point of view. I mean, there's just a lot of crazy stuff that's going to happen as a result of kind of going down that path. How that applies in the context of enterprise AI is a really excellent question. You can think of what's happening with agents and tools, forming this kind of world of working around in an enterprise context and like trying to learn the right way to do your job, kind of a thing, as a reinforcement learning task. Uh, but it is a thing where kind of the predominant way people make progress there is to just try it and see what happens, as opposed to kind of reasoning about what the right architecture is at any given point in time. And, one can argue about the risks associated with that, but it's in some sense that's the only way we're going to find out whether these things are effective in use in that way.
Yeah, I guess it just quickly made me think about my enterprise. Like if I have a knowledge agent that sort of like is me at Weaviate and then maybe it makes the decision of like it's going to send Bob a message. And so it's got to be a little bit more maybe cautious about like, is it really strategic to send, let's say my agent decides to send Bob like a 3 paragraph message. And so it kind of is like a burden on him to read it. Like then there's maybe that kind of reasoning as you're navigating the sort of enterprise agent world.
Right. And that's the thing where it's not just reasoning. It's just basically how do you build the system in a way where it engages with a community in a way which is consistent with the norms of behavior, right? How do you get that in a reliable way? And I think that this kind of the neurosymbolic approach, where you rely on, sort of the neural architectures to give you the ability to cope with stuff coming from every direction in ways that you hadn't anticipated originally, with a symbolic scaffolding that will allow us to provide guardrails and, create governance mechanisms that make sure that the behavior is, not going to go in some completely, destructive or unproductive manner. Those are the architectural questions that really need to be resolved for effective use of this technology in the enterprise. And I mean, people are beginning to grapple with that, but it's very much a kind of Cambrian explosion of like people doing all sorts of stuff and throwing it against the wall to see what sticks. And, hopefully that won't cause, a lot of damage or bad incidents moving forward, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, super cool. So much to that. I like the role-based access control and how that applies to agents too. Like, and then like, yeah, like, can you modify? Are you read write on this database collection, maybe even at an individual object level, and then you could say, yeah, for like age, for all sorts of things. Just you get totally distracted talking about that. But Dr. Allen, this is, oh, sorry.
Oh no, it's just it gets into also these questions that we're now beginning to get into, that things like mythos and so forth are beginning to raise, which um, is there behavior that's being manifested that is intentional from the point of view of the agent that could be misaligned with the goals of the enterprise or the people that it's engaging with? And that's a huge open question that is really important for us to be able to address fairly quickly, for us to use this stuff responsibly. So
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. So a question I like to anchor the podcast with is